Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stacy Gordon-Funk, the Chief Development Officer for the Jewish Federation and the JCC. Thank you so very much for joining us today. A special thank you goes out to our moderator, Julie Ellis, and our terrific panelists for participating. Welcome to our first ever ASTA Expert Town Hall. This is our first attempt, so thank you for your patience with us, and we are very excited to hear from all of you. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them in the comments area, and we'll try to get as many questions answered as we can today. And now I would like to introduce our moderator for the afternoon, Dr. Julie Ellis. Julie joined us as a practicing internist for almost 20 years and is currently with Baptist Health. She also serves on the board at the Jewish Community of Louisville, and I had the pleasure of growing up with Julie 2 doors down, right, Julie? So welcome, everybody, and I will turn it over to you, Julie.
Thanks so much. I'd like to take a second to just introduce our panelists. Dr. Jon Klein, U of L faculty member, Vice Dean for Research at the School of Medicine, currently most famous for his weekly visits with us via Mayor Fisher, as he serves as the medical and scientific advisor. He is also on the board of the Jewish Community of Louisville. Dr. Jeff Goldberg, a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist with a specialty in gynecology oncology, consultant in healthcare quality and patient safety. He is also on the board. We have Julie Ciriano, a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in trauma, PTSD, anxiety, and depression in adults and teens. She's in private practice with Meridian Integrated Wellness. She's been a therapist for almost 20 years. And Mauri Malka is the Senior Director in Programs at the Jewish Family and Career Services. She's a licensed clinical social worker with 35 years of experience in mental health, geriatric care, and family caregiving. So welcome to everybody, and welcome everybody in Facebook world. Again, if you have any questions, please just type them in and we'll get to what we can. We'll start with you, Jon. In your opinion, how much longer do you predict we can go on having without having public and social interactions?
I don't, that's a question about economics and sort of public psychology. I'll take a stab at it. I think that it's clear to all of us that the pressure to sort of restart our society is growing. It's difficult to maintain this level of social distancing. The real trick is going to be how well we incorporate social distancing into our day-to-day lives so that we can stay safe while still resuming as much of our previous lives as possible. So the best example of that is for physicians that the governor announced yesterday. Waiting rooms are going to disappear for a while. We're going to socially engineer more distance into the doctor's office visit. So most places will start using the parking lot. People will wait in their cars and then be texted or called on their cell phone. That's something that 3 months ago we couldn't have imagined. And yet it's going to become the new normal, as are a lot of things. So the answer is we're going to go back slowly and cautiously. And in Kentucky, I think we're going to go back very intelligently into our everyday lives. But they're going to change for quite some time.
Okay, then to you, Jeff. How long do vulnerable people need to shelter in place? What's going to be the end thing? A vaccine, something else?
So, again, it's hard to predict the future. We're certainly hopeful that there will be some advances in medical therapy, make this disease less serious. At some point, we hope we will have a vaccine. And as those things come around, then certainly we can relax some of the restrictions that we have. Until then, it's worth noting that the very best way that we have to keep people healthy is to keep you from getting the virus in the first place. And the best way to do that is to, in various ways, distance ourselves from other people. It's important to note that this virus doesn't get transmitted through the water. It doesn't flow through the atmosphere. It doesn't go through the food supply. The only way it goes from person to person is it's got to hitch a ride on somebody. So it has to infect somebody, and that person then has to go be in close proximity to somebody else. We could get this pandemic to come to a crashing halt within a few weeks if we could all somehow magically get everyone in the world to enforce what we've been calling social distancing. Human nature being what it is, that's not realistic, and that's why we see the pandemic continue to go on. So to summarize, it's going to go on for as long as it needs to get this under control. I know that people are antsy, they're anxious to get back to some kind of new normal, but the virus is in charge. As much as we wish that we can get back to our old activities, the virus is just going to keep spreading around until we pay attention and do the right thing.
All of this brings about a great deal of anxiety in all of us, for sure. So Julie, let's ask you, how do we talk to our children about Corona without them becoming anxious? And what advice do you have if that anxiety happens?
That's a good question. The best thing to do as parents is to be open and honest with your kids about the virus, depending on their age and what they can understand. Trying to reassure kids that they're safe, that the things they can control, which would be, their behavior, doing their schoolwork, trying to be nice to other people, that, just trying to calm their fears, but also be honest with them.
And Mauri, what about people? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
I was mute, sorry. My husband would like to do that to me all the time. It doesn't work for him. I would just add on to what Julie said, that kids look to parents as their role models, and if the parents are presenting in a very calm manner, they seem to be in control, that just helps to ease the kids' concerns. So they're looking to them for direction on how they're all going to behave.
So for people living alone, Mauri, what are some suggestions you can give them? I mean, it has to be incredibly isolating. What can you offer people?
So I think people need to remember that social distancing doesn't mean social isolation, and not to confuse the two. Yes, we do have to maintain that social distance, but we need to think of new ways of being able to connect with others, whether it's through Zoom, phone calls. I've heard of people having Zoom dinners where everybody prepares their meal, they get together on Zoom, and they meet together. Other things is reaching out to old acquaintances, people that you haven't spoken with in a long time, making a phone call. One of the things we all have more of now is time. So utilizing that time in ways to just reconnect with people in other ways. It's also important to remember why we're doing this. It's really hard when you feel like something is imposed upon you, but if remember, we're doing this because we're trying to take care of ourselves and we're trying to take care of others. And the social distancing has a consequence, and it's a positive consequence for all of us. Also, it's important to, even though you might be home alone, creating a routine, kind of a plan for your day, it's more important than ever to kind of build that structure into your life and to try to build that structure and stick to it. Also, taking the opportunity, move around, move your body. It's a good time if you're so inclined, go for a walk if you're able to do it, and practice good social distancing. Go walk around your yard, sit out on your balcony, do things to get outside, to move around, to just create some interest in your day. Try to plan for one small thing that you can accomplish every day. I saw my neighbor outside the other day, and I yelled over the fence, "Are you doing okay?" And she goes, "Yes, I've cleaned all my closets." So whether it's a closet or your basement, your garage, or your kitchen cabinets, find some little thing that's easy to do and you can see, results right away. Also, just a reminder to eat well, drink plenty of fluids. And if you're struggling, I mean, I think what happens is we all tend to do okay to a certain point, but if we notice that we're not able to do these things for ourselves, then it's time to reach out to a professional.
Great answer. Thank you so much. The only thing I think I would add to that from my medical background is a lot of what I'm hearing is people putting off care because of their fear of coming to the hospital. And I can't encourage people enough, if they have any concerns about, I mean, certainly contact their doctor. And we do Zoom visits all day long, telephone visits. The offices are open and answering phones, but the ERs are open and safe for people. You don't have to come in just if you think that you have been exposed to COVID. We want you to come in for whatever you would come in for before. So my fear is that people are going to put things off, and I want to encourage you to not do that, because that would really add insult to injury over all of this that we're dealing with now. So we talked about some coping skills, maybe enough. We can maybe touch on that again in the future. But speaking of, so Jon, what do I do if I think I've been exposed, or I have a high fever or shortness of breath or a dry cough? What should I do?
So as usual, you contact your primary care doctor or nurse practitioner, and you explain to them what's going on. What they will do is reassure you and ask you to quarantine at home. Many people have the infection. A number of people, including people who I work with at the university, simply home quarantine, and they tolerate these really severe sort of symptoms, and it can lengthen, it can go for a lengthy period of time. If you reach a point where you simply feel like these are becoming hazardous symptoms and people have to judge for themselves, or their relatives for elderly people need to judge for them, then it's time to go to the hospital. But a number of people, particularly if you're young and otherwise healthy, have ridden this out with some shortness of breath and very hectic fevers. And it's really what's in the best interest of all the vulnerable people around you. But there comes a time where your symptoms become severe enough. If your fever causes you to be dehydrated, if you're lightheaded, any number of things that after consultation with your doctor, you'll be directed to go to the emergency room or to an immediate care center. It is possible, if you're young and otherwise healthy, or even middle-aged and otherwise healthy, to ride this out. And truthfully, being tested is still to a great extent reserved for people who are in the hospital. If you feel like you might have COVID-19, then act like you have COVID-19 and isolate yourself and quarantine yourself. The test is simply a reassurance that your diagnosis was correct. It won't change what you do.
Great, great. So we don't know how long this will last, Mauri, how long this will all last. If there is a silver lining or something that we can learn from it, what do you think that might be?
Well, I think I've really, quite honestly, I've been so inspired by professionals in our community and just by people in our community, the way people have responded. I think I've seen general more caring. When I am out in my yard and someone walks by, we're concerned about how we're doing. So I think there's been concern, a general concern for others that's been lifted. I also think there's been a heightened awareness about mental health and the availability of services and the importance of good mental health. And so I think that's very positive. And I see people have learned, they're starting to develop coping skills and building resilience. And again, I think this can just help us be stronger as we move forward. And I think what's going to happen as we move out of that, we're not going to be moving back, we're going to be moving on. And I think there's going to be kind of a new normal. And I don't know how many iterations of a new normal we're going to have as this continues to develop. But I do think that we're looking at ways that we can extend our services, extend our connections. And I see that there's going to be more opportunities for people to just engage and be served in different ways.
I think that would be a great outcome. You're right. So we have a question. And I guess John or Jeff could take this one. What role does nutrition play in boosting immunity and overall health as it pertains to the virus?
John, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. So, you know, the old truths that our grandmothers taught us are still in effect. Nothing's been suspended yet. So eating well, getting sleep are all ways to keep your immune system intact. There are no special supplements that will help you enhance your immune system. If you have diseases and conditions that impair your immune system, then you need to be sort of a little more vigilant, a little more aware. So if you're diabetic, or if you have heart disease, congestive heart failure, you're more vulnerable. And so your immune system then becomes really what you've got to protect yourself, as well as your social distancing. So it's as straightforward as we can get. Good nutrition, eat regularly, stay well hydrated, and practice very strict social distancing if you're at risk. Jeff?
Right, huh? So John, same to you again. Can you comment on what's going on at the university now? Such exciting news coming out, bits and pieces, vaccine treatment, swab.
It's a very interesting time. Sorry. It's a very interesting time to be in academics. There's sort of this schizophrenic feeling that on the one hand, the problems are important and very exciting. And then like you, I'm a clinician. And so I've been in the hospital during the last several weeks and seen, you know, how very difficult things are. But looking at the exciting, you know, innovative side, the university is very, very fortunate to have built a regional biocontainment laboratory some years ago with help from the federal government. It's one of a very few 8 or 12 of these in the country. And so those people who do research there were able to get the live virus back in January before this really emerged on our radar screen. That allowed them to develop a test to detect the virus in nasal swabs. And so the university actually launched the first local testing in the community and really did about 80 to 90% of it. On the research side, that same biocontainment laboratory, because it deal with these very dangerous viruses, is working on vaccines. And they have 2 vaccine candidates as well as 1 preventive treatment that are currently being fast-tracked by the FDA. And in the news this week that we all saw was the Cancer Center repurposed some of its research to examine whether a synthetic piece of genetic material could block the entry of the virus into cells. And in the initial studies, it was successful in blocking it. And that's a long way from a treatment, but that is certainly good basic science evidence that it's worthwhile moving on to animal studies and then into humans. None of this is going to provide an answer in the next 12 months. This is a longer timeline than we're used to. So while it's all very exciting, people have to be very patient with the pace of science. It's moving faster than I've ever seen it move, but it is still not fast enough to sort of let us go back to January 1st of this year.
Great. Okay. So Jeff, the next question is, I understand that we definitely need more time for hospitals to prepare and closer to medications that help. But I wonder if our social isolation at some point isn't prolonging or postponing the herd immunity, if that's how it works.
So that's a great question. A lot of people have taken an approach that says, well, if we're all just going to get it anyway, why don't we go ahead and get it over with? England in particular looked at that approach. A number of downsides to that. One is that we've seen in certain places like in Italy and New York, in other places that have been overwhelmed, we have exceeded our capacity to take care of people who otherwise we might have been able to save. So there's no question we have to do whatever we need to do to keep the disease down at a certain rate, so that the people that can be helped with modern technology actually have access to those resources. The second thing is that we're all cautiously optimistic that in the not too distant future, there will be either better treatments or better preventive therapies for this infection. I don't know what they're going to be. I don't know if they're coming in 3 months or 6 months or 18 months, but we're optimistic that that something or more than one thing is going to be available in the short term. I can tell you that the research for vaccine is progressing in ways that have never been seen before in medical history. If you look at the track record of medicine, we've been able to step up to challenges like finding treatments for HIV, finding treatments for Ebola. Our techniques have gotten better and faster. So it's not unreasonable to ask people to accept some short-term social and emotional and economic pain if we can, push out the time when people would otherwise get infected to 6 months or 12 months, something in that time frame. Because if I can keep you from getting infected now, I'm hoping we'll have something better to keep you from getting infected a year from now.
What if we think we've been infected and are interested in antibody testing?
So that's a newer type of test that's becoming available. We're all very excited about the potential, but there's a lot of unanswered questions. So antibody testing does not look necessarily for the presence of the virus right now. It looks to see if you've been exposed to the virus in the past and have developed any natural immunity against it. There's a number of unanswered questions. Number one, like all tests, there are certain false positives and false negatives. And because this is such a new virus to be testing, we don't have a good handle on exactly what the rate of false positives and false negatives are. The second thing is it's one thing to test to see if you've been exposed to the virus and have had some kind of immune response. With many diseases, that immune response means you become immune to that disease and you will not get it again. However, that's not universally true. And because this is such a new virus and nobody on the planet has had it more than 3, 4, 5 months, we can't really say anything about if you have immunity now, how long is that going to last? Are you going to be able to get it again a year from now, or are you protected long term? So these are things that we're currently evaluating. At the present time, there is certainly some hope that if you have activated your immune system against this virus, that it confers at least some level of protection, and that may, and I emphasize may, be useful as we go forward and we address things like how long do people have to continue practicing social distancing, and will that help us open back up again? But right now, we don't know the answers to those questions, and it's important to emphasize that. John, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, I think it's important for everyone to understand that there's been this explosion of antibody tests in the last 14 days. The FDA is not approving these tests. They have an alternative mechanism that they call emergency use authorization. It is not the same as FDA approval. Unfortunately, what that's led to is a number of substandard tests being made commercially available. There are about 20 tests on the market, and they really need to be carefully looked at because some of them are built in such a way that you can have false positives, and that is to say, it will tell you you have antibodies when you really don't to this particular virus. The second thing is there's a difference, as Jeff mentioned, between having antibodies and having protection. You can have antibodies, but the question is how effective are they? So another level of testing that's going to come online in the next 2 weeks is what's called a neutralizing antibody. And that's already in place at the Center for Predictive Medicine in a research lab at U of L. But as far as clinical use of that, It's a little more difficult because it actually uses the live virus in the test. So you have to be in one of these very sophisticated biocontainment laboratories to do the test. Probably in the next 2 weeks, there'll be tests that don't require the biocontainment and the live virus. And those will be assays that will say, okay, you've had the disease, you have antibodies, and they, at least in the test, can destroy the virus. That'll be a little more of a confidence builder, I think, going forward. The value of these is once we are confident that these are assays that tell us not just about antibody levels, but about protection. The value of that is that it will begin to let us target groups that have antibodies to re-enter society in a more fulsome way. But we're probably a month away from making those sort of judgments.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question for, I guess either John or Jeff could take this one. Does a respiratory condition caused by seasonal allergies make you any more vulnerable to complications? We know that long-term respiratory problems do, but do these short-term problems caused by seasonal allergies?
So what we know so far is based on people who've been in the hospital, we can look at what sort of conditions they have that seem to be present in excess of what you might otherwise normally expect. The top ones that we're seeing are certainly if you're older, you're at higher risk. If you are obese, if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, these are all very strong risk factors for getting seriously ill from COVID-19 and winding up in the ICU or even on a ventilator. There are some other conditions that are less strong risk factors. What we've not been seeing are excessive amounts of seasonal allergies or even people with mild asthma. So anybody can get this virus, and even young, healthy people can get seriously ill. Fortunately, that's relatively uncommon if you don't have any of those risk factors.
Great. Okay. One other question for Mauri, going back to older adults and loneliness. A lot of older adults just don't have computer access and can't Zoom with their families. What kind of things can you offer them?
I really struggle in thinking about the older adults that are in that situation because it is very difficult. And if there are family members that are connected with those older adults, I would say trying to coordinate among family to make frequent calls, to do more, like the good old days, send a letter, getting something in the mail is at least something to look forward to. Dropping off a porch care package, if the grandkids can all draw a picture, just I think the bottom line is for people that while they're alone, that they don't feel all alone. So by doing little gestures that can help just give them something to look forward to. So whether it's the phone call, dropping off care packages. I know I periodically go and stand behind my mother's porch. She has a big wall, and I'd go stand up on the wall and wave, and we talk and go. So we're far apart, but we get to communicate. So it's just finding those little ways that are safe to be able to maintain that connection and have other family members joining in, so that people are getting more frequent calls and more frequent attention. And I think also reminding them, helping them to build some structure in their day. So giving them some of those same strategies that we do for all people for isolation, encouraging them to walk outside if they're able, walk outside, do some of those simple tasks, help them set a goal each day, again, just to build some structure in their life.
Okay, so the next couple of questions as we kind of start to wrap this up is the reopening of society and / the second wave of this virus. Can people who are cured or have recovered, we should say, from the virus transmit the virus to somebody who's not been exposed? And how will the second wave impact us? If we could put all that kind of together. John, do you?
Well, I'll start and then I'll pass the baton off. There are a lot of questions there. And they're all actually very good, and they're all, I think, typical of what's on a lot of people's minds. Let me take the next wave question and just be very serious about it. This virus is not something that we can manipulate. It's not something we can persuade. It is a physical, biological fact. It's a physical fact, much like gravity. You may not like gravity when something falls off the shelf and breaks, but you can't change it. It's there and it's real. The virus has affected about 5% of the people in this country, as best you can estimate, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Before we get to that population protection, sometimes called herd immunity, we have to have another 55% to 65% of the country go through an infection with this. And it is going to happen, barring the development of some preventative agent, which is not likely. So I don't think that there's much chance that we'll avoid a second wave. I think that it can be, really a very difficult event for the community. And it may be that we have to go back to full social distancing as that wave develops. Mm-hmm. If you look back at the 1918 pandemic of influenza that stretched into spring of 1919, there were 3 separate waves. It was a similar virus, not in the sense of being biologically similar. It was similar in that people had never encountered it before. And that's at the heart of all that's going on here, is that this is a virus biologically encountered before probably around October, November of 2019. So the waves will come. We will have to deal with them. I'm encouraged by the way that we're beginning to sort of socially engineer the precautions into our daily life, and I think we're going to be able to resume some of our daily life. But ultimately, the virus will have its say, and we will simply have to deal with it.
So someone asked a great question to follow up what you're saying, and certainly something that we're dealing with in our household, of what do you think college students, mm-hmm. I mean, when you think about college students, do you think they'll be able to return to campuses in the fall? And if so, what is that going to look like for them?
I think schools in general are going to be very, very different for the near future until we have a vaccine. I think that in order to space people appropriately, we're going to have much smaller classroom sizes. Finally, we'll achieve a teacher-student ratio of around 12 to 14. But what that also means is that schools will work in shifts. There'll be split shifts so that you can accommodate the same number of students. It means that a large number of students will continue to learn from home. And that we'll have to really intensify hygiene, whether it's at the university level or at the primary school level. Hygiene within those facilities is going to have to be really intensified. But I think we can try those things to go back to a more normal school existence, whether it's college or AJ and JCC preschools. But we'll find out, and through surveillance and constant testing, whether that's a practical thing to do or not. Mm-hmm. And hopefully, God willing, it is.
Right, dependent upon the testing levels. I think that we'll be able to get to the testing levels that the governor has recommended us to have to start to reopen things here in Kentucky.
So the issue with testing is we certainly all see on the news how we need better access to more testing, and that's all been true. But like a lot of things, more is good, much more is not necessarily better. It's probably not necessary that we do universal testing, certainly not for the kind of testing we're doing now where we're looking for the presence of the virus. If I were to go out and test everybody, it would tell me if they have the virus today. That doesn't tell me if they had the virus a month ago and potentially might be immune to it to some degree. And it doesn't tell me that they're not going to have the virus tomorrow or a week from now. Mm-hmm. So we certainly need to be able to test people where it's important. We need to be able to confirm our impression that it is COVID-19 in somebody who's critically ill. We need to be able to test people that they could have potentially transmitted the virus to and see if they carry it asymptomatically and therefore need to shelter where they are. It's important that we be able to have access to testing that's easy and convenient for people to get, and that we get answers very quickly within hours, not days. But that doesn't mean that we need to be testing every single individual.
Well, thank you all very much. It looks like we're just about out of time. I want to thank Mauri, Julie, John, and Jeff for joining me here today to discuss this. We have more questions coming in, so we may look forward to doing something like this again in the future. If anybody missed out, it is recorded and available on Facebook Live from the Jewish Federation and on the Jewish Community of Louisville's YouTube channel. Thank you all very much for joining us today.
Bye.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Stay safe.
Thanks.